Good afternoon, everybody. It's Adrian Gosbell here. Just can somebody just reply back in chat just to say they can hear us all right, please? Okay, fantastic. Thank you. Right, so this is a session on Uniface 10, which we actually call a deeper dive into Uniface 10. Going to be presented by Tom Shaw, who's one of our Uniface experts that's normally based over in the US, happens to be in Amsterdam this week because we've got some training that's going on. This is an evolution of a presentation which has been presented at a couple of user groups, but it has been changed, and specifically the demo's been changed as well, so it's definitely worth going through this. As with all of these sessions, we always run them a couple of times. They are then recorded and we publish the recordings online on YouTube, and we will also make the presentation available on SlideShare. Questions are most welcome. Either post them during the chat, and either myself or Mike or somebody will pick them up and try and answer them if we can. If not, we'll take them as homework. And then beyond that, any questions that might come up afterwards, please put them into the forums on uniface.info. They're monitored quite heavily, and we can pick them up and deal with them there. So without any further ado, I'm going to hand over to Tom, and he can go off and do his stuff.
Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. We're going to go through a number of things this afternoon. It is called the deep dive, but really what we're going to do is take you through some of the features and functionality available in Uniface 10 and how we can apply them and use them within our organizations. A quick agenda. I will go through some key features. The deeper part is to understand how we can use Uniface 10 and the concepts of palettes and templates to, in essence, codify our best practices and then use them within our organization or share to the general public. And as Adrian said, please, if you have any questions, pop them through the chat. We can possibly answer those, directly or following this session. Got a couple of screenshots of Uniface 10. Those of you that were nodding at screens 1, 2, and 3, you can step to the back of the room. You failed the test. There are actually a variety of other technologies such as Eclipse, Visual Studio, and NetBeans, which really goes to what we were trying to accomplish with Uniface 10. You'll see that we also have different views, perspectives, if you will, within the technology. It's based around a couple of key aspects that we're trying to get both existing customers and new developers more familiar with the platform. So really the problem that we're trying to solve is one that's existed for quite a while. There are a lot of people who were trained on Uniface and they kind of understood how the technology worked and implemented it very successfully within organizations. The challenge has been is that sometimes the next person that got involved may or may not have been trained and ended up creating Uniball, which I don't think any would argue is easy to understand. It is absolutely syntactically correct. The challenge here is that it's not very understandable from a new person to the technology. So we're looking for ways to go ahead and make this make more sense. Hopefully people are cringing at the sight of some of this stuff, but this is actually out of production code. And I don't know anybody who says I don't have some of this in my organization today. Begs the question, why should I go about fixing this? It exists, we're running it, what's the benefit to me of doing that? Well, first is efficiency. There have been a lot of times where people have bypassed product capability to do it their own way, and that was inherently inefficient. The second is consistency, that the product does things very well, and doing it the same way is good from not only a development perspective, but a maintainability perspective. And thirdly, the reality reality is we're trying to reduce the, wow, that's kind of different, which tends to be some of the conclusions that people make with Uniface, even previous to Uniface 10. That being said, so what have we actually done? What we've attempted to do, and I think we could all say that that has been accomplished, is that we've tried to normalize the development tooling within the Uniface IDE. So things such as navigation, understanding context, being able to single click throughout the environment, and a compact design is fairly well understood within the development community. Whether we're talking about a text editor or a development environment, these tend to be metaphors that people are pretty familiar with. From that, we came up with a number of key concepts. First, let's create a development environment that is visually similar to what everybody else is used to, including a lot of us that we use tooling other than Uniface, and we want to be, consistent, if you will. The thing that came out of that were concepts such as development objects, which are higher level components that don't exist today in previous releases of Uniface. I'll talk about snippets, templates, and palettes, and how those behave together and why those are of benefit. A couple of the other things that are fairly consistent with development technology, the concept of being able to have a single source entry, if you will, or a source file for dealing with code that we'll need to execute, as well as a lot of other just standard navigational techniques, being able to perform activities on multiple objects at the same time, dealing with properties, etc. And I'll take you through that. At the end of this presentation, I will get into the product and do a demonstration of some of the concepts and capabilities that I've talked about. So in Uniface 10, we have the concept of development objects. That's a fancy way of saying we've got an object that has children. The unique characteristic of that is that entire unit can be exported. So if we're talking about a project, which is also a new container within Uniface 10, projects have components. I can export the entire project out as a single unit of work, and all of its children will be exported as well. That's very useful. So rather than having to determine what is part of your logical project by having a physical project, it allows that activity to be performed automatically, if you will. It also holds true for libraries or palettes, that I have the ability to create a collection of those elements and categorize them and export them together, as well as entities, and of course have fields. This in particular, we have the ability to go ahead and store those relationships on the many side, so when I can bring those objects into another environment and reestablish a relationship, rather than having to have both dependent objects. Each one of these objects has the ability to be directly addressed through a URL, and specifically its definition, a uniform resource locator. I want the ability to go ahead and directly index a particular object. I can do that through my browse bar. I can do that through typing this address in. It is very useful for sharing direct navigation to a component. Previous to 10, if you wanted to go ahead and navigate to a particular property, you had to know how to get there. This eliminates that need. We've also introduced the concept of a palette, which you can think of as an artist palette, that has templates associated with it that in essence become your standards. The little blurb at the bottom about allow browse templates is an assignment file setting that allows you to go ahead and browse through templates that have already been created. This is by default turned off, hence I put it in the presentation so you know to turn it on. Palettes can be anything that you want to name and can contain anything you want them to contain. I just happen to have a list up here of basic templates, company standards, templates, the templates that we provide with the technology. Those are comprised of an element name followed by a descriptive name. So rather than keeping technical details out there, I can make something more appropriate. You can have as many palettes and templates as you want and as many as you need. They can be very granular, as you will see in the demonstration, or they can be very macro. So maybe I have, for a particular project, this is the collection of all the things that I want to do, and it allows architects or people behaving in that capacity to go ahead and share their valuable knowledge with the organization, and also gives us the opportunity to verify that, and I'll talk about that as well. So the concept of a template is pretty straightforward. In Uniface 10, when we talk about a template, we're talking about the recipe or the base for an object. That can be included in your project, and then it's derived. So I couple information from models, other aspects, and bring that into the template to realize a modeled component. So in this situation, which is also part of the demonstration, I've got my palette of Bootstrap standards. To that, I've created two particular templates that will be associated with that project. One is a fairly straightforward Bootstrap page where I've got, the concept of a search area, a couple of action buttons, followed by some details around a group of records. And I've got a snippet library that contains, in this situation, some basic header information that I would need to put into a page to include those Bootstrap definitions. So, rather than typing this in by hand, I can go ahead and include it. I just happen to be using CDN in this situation, as you can see. This gives me the capability to go ahead and either partially or fully construct a component and give us a starting point rather than copying from a previous component. This also means that inheritance is preserved, so if we need to change a standard, I can go ahead and accomplish that. And the result, of course, is a standard, in this situation, DSP, that gives me a search area, a search button, a clear and a save, and even the trash can icon at the end of the row. All the code behind this is also inherited, so in the situation of a search, behind that I check to see if the search text has been filled in, and I want to go ahead and use that as the profile. Similarly, for the clear, all Uniface folks will say, oh, that's a clear statement behind that. The save button is as expected. It's got the store statement, and most importantly, the commit, so that it actually does commit those changes to the database. With the product, we provide hundreds of snippets. The reason for that is to demonstrate capability, to also categorize things. So for field triggers, for example, we've categorized those field triggers into those that are appropriate for DSPs, USPs, etc. We absolutely expect you to create your own. Part of that could be a starting point by using the templates that we provide. Some may be, this is just the way we do it. We want to provide only those things that would make sense for a developer to use within our organization. For example, the format to DBMS and format to display, those are the renamed format and deformat triggers. I can go ahead and provide more documentation and tooltips so that someone knows precisely what they're working on. It is absolutely in your best interest to categorize these things so that you're only presenting your developers with those objects that make sense for the work that they're doing at this particular moment in time. The idea behind this is it gives you a facility to capture not only your application design, but also application behavior, and that can be encapsulated in a number of ways, either through proc script, through component interaction, through relationships, etc., that can be captured into a series of templates that can be provided. Because they are based on templates, we can find any variance to that. So it gives you the opportunity to know whether people are following the rules. But realistically, if I have to do less work by relying on the company's standards, that's good for me. The result of that is I get a way to standardize on both coding rules but also design concepts. So if we go back to that original slide, I can share knowledge with developers without having to have them, if you will, wing it and going through and writing code. I also don't have to use, someone's inaccurate example, if you will, to go ahead and propagate that forward. I could ask for a show of hands. Does that make sense? And hopefully everybody's hands going up. Adrian and Mike just did, so woohoo. A couple of other things as well. This is all documented in the help file. I asked the other day how many people using Uniface 10 had opened the help file, and sadly, rather than having a massive show of hands, only a couple went up. This diagram is directly out of that documentation. We've gone through, and I will show you in the demo, through these key concepts and produced diagrams where it makes sense so that there's never any confusion about what we're doing. I will tell you unequivocally that the documentation is updated as soon as functionality comes out, and if you happen to find something that's incorrect, please share it with us and we will make fixes to that as soon as possible. Now, we've included a number of concepts around the actual construction of code, if you will. We've created containers, which in essence concretely map the execution model of Uniface. So in this particular example, I've got the ability to declare a scoped variable for this container, and I've got specific areas that are addressed either on a collection by collection basis or an occurrence basis. I can put this into previous Uniface 10 terms. So my collection script, in essence, are those triggers that deal with things that are associated with an entity, such as the read, write triggers, etc. The occurrence script are those triggers that are associated with the actual occurrence itself. So occurrence gets focus, for example. The containers are also scoped. So in this example, I've got an available to everyone variable that will be available to the entire component because its container is a component container. Previously, we added you had the ability to create a component variable. Quite frankly, nobody ever remembered how you got to it. Was it on the edit menu, the go-to menu, what have you? This allows you to declare it directly in code. That's also useful because if you had proc or an include proc, for example, and you needed a component variable, you had to go into the component and add it there. This gives you the ability to dynamically create that. It also has the capability, utilizing some functionality that was created in Uniface 10 and brought back to previous releases, to also include syntax and layout on the particular variable. So I can go ahead and say, for example, this date field has the following display format directly, just like you could in the previous bring up the form and enter it there. I can do it directly in text. You'll also note that the proc script that's included in these triggers has comments. The proc script that we include in the form of snippets has documentation in it. Rather than referring to the documentation to say, oh, does this return a 1 or a 0? What would be appropriate? I can go ahead and see that directly in the script block. For your organization, you may choose to go ahead and change this type of stuff, saying, when we do this particular operation, these are the things that we need to do, including things such as, initially created 1117 by TSS. You can absolutely do that. So, as I said earlier, the particular areas of the container control what exactly will be processed and when. It makes it a little easier because previously, those events were associated with a particular entity, for example, and now I can associate it in a vertical fashion so I can see what I'm doing as we go through. We've also added a property inspector, just like every other environment. So on the left-hand side of the development environment, as you will see, I've got an ability to navigate objects. On the right-hand side, I have the ability to look at that object and present all of its properties in one shot. Previously, you needed to go ahead and go through a number of screens to get all the detail. We've tried our best to make sure that we're presenting all the appropriate information at the same time. In some situations, there's a lot more information that needs to be presented, and we bring up a particular form for that as well. It also allows you, however, to go ahead and multi-select and perform multiple actions on particular elements that have been selected. Not only will it tell me that these two are different, I can also use it to go ahead and change the particular behavior, possibly setting it to be generic, modeled, etc. I told Christy this morning that I would go ahead and put some exercises that I'd worked on out on GitHub and do a blog post on that. She jumped up and down and clapped her hands. This is part of that, so it'll give people an understanding of how to walk through this type of stuff, and you'll see some of that in the demonstration. We've also tried to go ahead and make things that may not have been completely obvious in the past extraordinarily obvious in Uniface 10. Once again, shamelessly stolen out of the documentation for a number of reasons. One, if you ask people what is the default behavior in a particular trigger, you'll get varying answers. You'll also get varying answers on what actually gets inherited, or is that a default action. So we've come up with some very straightforward ways of understanding how that works, but documentation is exactly that. Most people are not going to read it. So we've gone ahead and produced pretty pictures to show people this is the way it works, and they're still not going to read that. So we've gone ahead and created a module inspector that will show you exactly where the inheritance came from and show you any place that it's been overridden. So when I compile a module on the right-hand side, and I'll show you this, you'll see exactly where the particular logic came from. By double-clicking on the particular trigger, it will take me to that, whether it's in this component or whether it's in a modeled component, for example. Those icons are documented. They have different meanings. We've been working on making these things much more obvious, but they are colored different. So you can see that this is an override, this is a local, this is inherited, etc. In doing this, certainly there were some underlying changes done to the Uniface repository. For those people that have written their own repository utilities or rely on this, this is your opportunity to understand what has been done. Certainly not at the micro level, but much more at the macro level. There were some people that understood that in Uniface 10 we were eliminating the model, and that's absolutely not true. What we did was we removed the dependency on the conceptual schema, which was defined in UCSCH, and it was simply a primary key. What we've done now is allowed the model to be exactly what it is, which is namespace. So like in every other environment, you've got the opportunity to declare namespace. That's what the model is used for. In fact, when you migrate an existing application into Uniface 10, that will be established for you. For those that are constructing new applications, it's nothing more than text. So yes, the model is still used and used throughout. Couple of other things. The second bullet point has to do with the fact many years ago, 2+, we told you that the classic deployment option with Uniface was going away and that we were using UARs. That is totally true in Uniface 10. We've warned you in the past to go ahead and move to this deployment architecture because there really are great concepts behind this. You know, this gives you the ability to go ahead and package up your application and know precisely what has been deployed. You know, if you're moving files around, you may be able to say, I know exactly what's deployed, but you can't be definitive. So the UAR is that container that holds your application and its requirements. Because of that, we don't need to have the ULANA and USysANA any longer. So the URR and the DOL, you know, aren't necessary. A lot of people have said that's terrific because I never knew what they did and I never knew when I needed to do it. There's some people that had some heartache at one of the developer conferences, but you know, this is the way we're going and there's a good reason for it. A couple of other things were retired as well. Type library definitions, signature keywords. You know, this is the other show of hands. How many people ever entered a signature keyword, know what it was? You know, results at 0. As well as the component integration workspace. So those are some changes that we made simply because they were no longer necessary. We did make changes that were necessary and they're fantastic. Description fields are now much longer, so you can use the documentation capability within the model to document what you're doing. It's astonishing how little documentation I have seen in applications when we explicitly provide the facility to do it. You know, it's not for your benefit, it's for the next person's benefit that comes in and take a look at this, and that is on fields, entities, components, projects, etc. Code containers now live in one field. If you were familiar with a repository, each individual trigger had its own field associated with it. Using the containers, that's now captured in one specific field. It certainly makes it easier for those developers that are more comfortable with a single source file or a couple of multiple source files rather than having individual fields associated with it. Also, the last line has to do with the description template. It's now a wide 64, so Unicode support as well as 128 characters if you're not using it. Okay. Let me do the following. I don't know if we've got any questions coming in. I'm actually going to pop in.
Yeah, there was, but I've answered them.
Okay.